Aspect of the COVID-19 legislation is a part of the bill that focuses on how do we deal with bringing back our personal protective gear production from overseas, particularly from China, and how to deal with the concern we have that some of the work we're doing on therapies and cures, and by the way, there's substantial more resources, billions of dollars that goes into that in this bill, that other countries aren't taking this research. So right now, in labs all around America, some of the best and brightest minds are at work on therapies, cures, and vaccines for COVID-19. It's changed all our lives in the past few months, and we stand to benefit from these medical breakthroughs. We want them to happen. So again, Congress has already appropriated billions of dollars, and in the McConnell proposal, there is billions more for this purpose, and that's appropriate. But as we work to find a cure, there are troubling reports emerging that China, in particular, is actively trying to take this research for themselves. As the FBI and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency warned in May, there has been a pattern of, and I quote, targeting and compromise of U.S. organizations conducting COVID-19 related research by China-affiliated cyber actors and non-traditional collectors, end quote. FBI Director Wray was even more pointed about this threat earlier this month, stating on July 7th that at this very moment, he said, China is working to compromise American healthcare organizations, pharmaceutical companies, and academic institutions conducting essential COVID-19 research. Just last week, the Justice Department filed charges against a Chinese researcher who failed to disclose her ties to the People's Liberation Army while conducting medical research at Stanford University. While she was not accused of stealing the research in this case, this kind of arrangement where scholars are essentially agents of the Chinese government to gain access to our cutting-edge labs around the country to find research to sneak back into China is all too common. That China would attempt to steal our research for their own benefit is, unfortunately, not surprising. As we have all seen over the past few months, China's failure to live up to its international commitments on critical issues like transparency and human rights have led to some of the issues we've had, particularly with regard to the lack of transparency on the unchecked spread of the coronavirus from Wuhan. Frankly, relations with China are not good right now, in part because of that. And unfortunately, our problems with China extend to our labs and our universities. As chair of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, I led a bipartisan investigation last year into this issue. Over the course of a year, we learned how the Chinese Communist Party has used so-called talent recruitment programs, notably its 1,000 Talents Plan, to systematically target the most promising U.S.-based research and researchers and pay them to take their American taxpayer-funded research back to Chinese universities. While stealing this research is bad enough, what's worse is that it's not taken for academic purposes. Instead, according to a State Department witness at our hearing last November, quote, the Chinese Communist Party has declared the Chinese university system to be on the front line of military-civilian fusion efforts for technology acquisition. This means there's a clear link between the research being taken from American labs and the latest advancement in China's military and its economy. There's more recent attention to this topic of research theft, which is a good thing. We need to talk about it. We need to expose it. We need to deal with it. Recently, both FBI Director Wray and Attorney General Barr have spoken about this threat. In fact, Director Wray announced that the FBI is opening a new China-related investigation on this topic every 10 hours. A new investigation every 10 hours, with around 2,500 counterintelligence investigations now going on around the country. We've seen this type of research theft in my home state of Ohio, unfortunately. Just a couple of months ago, a National Institute of Health-funded researcher affiliated with both the Cleveland Clinic and Case Western Reserve University was accused of hiding that he had received more than $3 million from the Chinese government to effectively take and replicate his Cleveland Clinic research at a lab in China. He's actually accused of taking biological samples from Cleveland, Ohio, to Wuhan, China. And this was taxpayer-paid research by the NIH. He's not alone. The NIH has recently reported that 54 scientists and researchers have either resigned or been fired as a result of an NIH investigation into American taxpayer-funded grant recipients for their failure to disclose financial ties to foreign governments, particularly China. In fact, according to the NIH investigation, more than 90% of the scientists had undisclosed ties to China. Unfortunately, as it stands, our law enforcement agencies can't go directly after these researchers for hiding their foreign conflict of interest, for not telling the truth while taking taxpayer money. As important as it is that we speak out against these improper actions by China around the world, it's also critical that we take steps to clean up our own house right here in the United States, make America more resilient against China. One way we can do that is by stopping research developed in our labs and universities from going to benefit China's military and economy at our expense. I'm pleased to say we have an opportunity to change that right now, because this legislation is included in the COVID-19 legislation, and in doing so, take a stand in a bipartisan manner in defense of our values of research transparency, collaboration, fairness, and national security. It's called the Safeguarding American Innovation Act, our legislation, and I introduced it along with Senator Tom Carper and a group of bipartisan senators to ensure that individuals are held accountable for failing to disclose their foreign ties on federal grant applications. It will also reform the State Department's vetting process for issuing visas to foreign researchers. It will require more safeguards on sensitive research from our research institutions and our universities, and will help us better track who is working on taxpayer-funded research. This bill is ready to pass the Senate. The Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee voted to approve it last week with bipartisan and unanimous consent. And I'm pleased to say that, again, Leader McConnell has chosen to include this legislation in his Phase 5 proposal, the CARES.2 package, because it will help protect taxpayer-funded COVID-19 research and serve as a safeguard for the $150 billion that Americans give to scientists to conduct research every year. That's the taxpayer funding that goes in to our research institutions. In that regard, including the Safeguarding American Innovation Act in this CARES.2 bill can and should be viewed as a fiscally responsible measure. As we continue to take a firmer stance against behavior that China has gotten away with for way too long, let's do all we can to put vulnerable American institutions on a solid footing as well. It's time to put an end to the Chinese Communist Party's theft of our taxpayer-funded research, including COVID-19 research. I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting the Safeguarding American Innovation Act. Mr. President, I'd ask